Okay, I'll get us rolling for today. So yesterday I should have sent out the very last of the emails to you guys with like thoughts on your outlines. I think for the most part, like I said earlier, looking really good. I gave each of you, I think, some little bit of direction if it felt like you needed it. And I really want to emphasize again, especially this next week and a half, 2 weeks. Every time we have this class, after this class immediately is like technically the open office hours, but you can always email me or just let me know. If you're down campus, half the time I'm at the museum anyway. If you want to just chat about something or talk about your slides. I think something I saw across a lot of the outlines, so some of you have read this in the email to you, but I can say it just generally is really think about your audience. Almost all of you are going to have like taken a dive into something really cool and specific, but remember where you were a month or two ago or whatever it was when you were first learning. So some of the outlines I had like the vibe that we might be like, so really into this really cool thing. It's like, no, take a minute to take us down there and build your points, build the ideas you want us to take away that we'll remember in a week or a month. You know, I know you might be breathlessly trying to like finish it and be done with it, but like give it a little touch. But for the most part, I think it looks really, really good and I'm excited to see them. So I am actually in the process of like making a schedule. I'm going to try to unite the talks based on, I think, how they will fit together. If there's a day, so it's just 1 week of class, lab and both lectures is when we're going to do all of this. Not next week, the week after. If you really, really, really care about Thursday versus Monday, you can let me know, but otherwise I'm going to just make a schedule. Hope that's cool. Okay. Otherwise, I have your second exams. We'll give those out at the end today, all graded. So we talked a little bit about metabolism on Tuesday, getting into things like those really simple measures of an animal's activity levels. And we talked about warm-blooded, cold-blooded, where you get your heat from, how stable you keep your body temperature, and all kinds of, I hope, evolutionary perspectives on these big phenomena, helping you guys ask questions. I want to spend today talking about like a couple different like ideas that are like adjacent to metabolism. And a lot of these are like adaptive to the environments that different organisms inhabit. So the first little bit of today, we're going to be talking about shutting it down. And when I woke up this morning and I opened the blinds and I saw snow, I was very disappointed. But it does actually kind of work today because this is what I wanted to talk about today. So here's the place that we live in July and in, let's say, December or January. And there's a graph that you guys maybe have seen before. Every place in the world at this point has this data. It's red line is precipitation and blue line, oh no, red line is temperature. And blue line is blue bars are precipitation of the 12 months of the year. So this is for Pocatello. That's Pocatello's graph of temperature and precipitation. If you're an organism that doesn't get to wear clothes and live in a house or an apartment or a dorm, you have to just be out in Idaho during this whole year, all 12 months, maybe. So talk to each other for a quick second about Idaho's, Pocatello specifically, climate on this graph. Big weather is great. Very all right. What are some very, very basic observations about Idaho's climate? Or Pocatello's climate, I don't say Pocatello. Pocatello's climate. High variability in temperature. We're way up here. Averages up in the high 60s, because that's nighttime and daytime all put together, right? Averages up in the high 60s, that's nice and temperate. Down here in these months, we're below freezing. Here's 0. So ice and snow, as you guys very well know. All right, what about precipitation? There's more of it. More of it in the cold months, the hot months. I think like it's actually like, you know, I haven't done the math. There's not stats up here, but if I just like squint, I think it looks like decently consistent, except for maybe the summer's kind of dry, right? For us up here in the high desert, the sagebrush steppe, kind of dry summers. This is probably rain. This is probably snow, but it's still inches of precipitation, right? So here we are in the 4 Apparently it's supposed to be in the high 40s or mid 40s. I don't know if it is or not. So that's just like a baseline for you guys. Here are a bunch of vertebrates that live here with us. Some of these don't live in like Partner Valley, that's okay, but they're really close by. Here's a whole bunch of different vertebrates. They all have different metabolisms. You guys know at this point, I think, a very good amount about their basic anatomy and their basic adaptations to their environment. These are all organisms you guys could, if you get up with Dr. Delahanty at 6:30 tomorrow morning and go out, you might see some of these organisms. Not all of them quite yet though. So talk to your neighbors for a second. If you guys are from Idaho or from the area, the Mountain West, these should be animals that are at least somewhat familiar to you. How are all of these different organisms adapting to Pocatello or Idaho's climate throughout the year? All the different things, July, December, in between. How are these organisms adapted to live in Idaho, and what anatomy do they have to do so? All right, take a few minutes to do this in chat. Okay, can a group give us an example? Tell us about one of the organisms, how it's going through the seasons. I heard a lot of specifics. Yeah, man.
We talked about like the moose and the
The
marmot.
moose.
They have, winter they get fur, and then in the summer and the hotter months, they shut it off.
So the moose and the marmot have mammalian furry integument. They can poof it out when they need to. They can grow it thicker when they need to, and certainly they do. Anything else with the moose and the marmot? Yeah, okay.
The first thing we brought up with moose at least is that those antlers with blood vessels all around and very thin skin are really big heat sinks. So shedding them in the winter is a good option, and then they cool the moose off.
So mooses grow their antlers out and they lose that velvet like in the fall as it starts to get cold, because you're totally right. You're gonna lose heat through that velvet really quickly. So they shake off that velvet, and that's when the antlers are actually like used to fight each other. And there's a whole nother reproductive thing happening there too, right? They have the fights and they mate in the fall, so that in the spring, babies are born into a nice flower world instead of being born in December. So there's a couple things happening there. That's true. What else? Anything else about the moose and the marmot? Differences? They definitely both, of course, have mammal fur. Yeah,
The marmots will have like holes in the ground and like burrows for the
burrows. You guys have not seen a marmot probably in a long time. I saw the first marmot of the year like last weekend, I think, for me. So marmots do something behavioral. They like disappear for a long time and you're not gonna see them. They hibernate. That's a behavioral adaptation. There's a lot of anatomy that goes into that. The moose hibernate? No, moose deals. All right, what else? What other organisms people talking about?
We talked a little bit about migration.
Okay, so what's migration? What do you mean?
So primarily the birds migrate to get away from the cold.
Birds migrate to get away from the cold. Do you guys, Christmas time, look out the window, little hummingbird in your backyard in Idaho? Hummingbirds get out. So think about other things. We didn't get to talk about it on Tuesday because we kind of ran out of time, but one thing that's a really big indicator of like, especially temperature regulation and homeothermy is like body size. The bigger you are, the easier it is to stay whatever temperature you already are. So a lot of large animals just like are producing so much heat and they have relatively little surface area. That moose is a great example. It's pretty easy for that moose to stay generally pretty warm. Hummingbird, or like a little mouse, has the opposite problem. It's a ton of surface area and very little mass. So hummingbird, even with feathers, can like dump heat. So hummingbirds have something behavioral, and there's a lot of anatomy that goes into that. That thing, this bird is this big, and it's gonna fly to Mexico or Costa Rica. That's wild. There's a lot of adaptations there. Does the chickadee do that? It's okay if you don't know. Any Delahanty people, any ornithology people want to jump in?
I don't think they migrate that far, but I do think they change.
Like regionally. So our chickadees in the summer might be like down in Utah at Christmas time, but then we just have Montana's chickadees here in December. Does that make sense? It's like a little bit of movement. It's like population level. That's cool. What other things people talk about?
I think it just stays in the water most of the time. It probably just migrates like the Portland River or something like that, but
What options does the trout have to go anywhere? Twin has a pretty serious waterfall, and then there's mountains over there, so it's kind of like, here I am. Yeah, the trouts are under the ice, right? Some of you probably have done it. You can cut a hole in the ice, and there's a bunch of fishes down there. They're like waiting for spring. They're lethargic and slow. So there's all kinds of adaptations here, and let's go through a few of them and talk about some of the cool anatomy that has to do with how these animals are overwintering. This is a migration map from Cornell. So if you guys don't do any birding, and if you want to get interested in birding, eBird and a bunch of the Cornell websites have like data now from years and years and years. This is like the actual population of this entire species throughout the year. This is where it is any given time. So we get them for a minute, right? In the summer, you guys might see this bird this spring. It'll be here really soon. I usually start seeing them in May. This is one of my favorite comics. I want you to read it if you haven't read it. I like it because like little birds are born in the spring, they don't know. And all of a sudden fall, they're like, they look like they're full adults, and all of a sudden everyone's like, all right, let's go. I like that a lot. Because that sucks, I would imagine, to have to fly way really far. So that's how some of these animals can deal, right? Just as a really almost stupid question, like birds and salamanders, here's the anatomy that they have. How likely is salamander migration in your mind, just based on what you know about the animal? You know, right? So flight is this thing that really changes. The longest migrations in the world are bird migrations. There's individual birds that are like in Alaska, and then they're in New Zealand, and then they're in China, and they've got like a little collar on their ankle. So it's like flight lets you do all kinds of very different things. So while some of these animals are migrating, they have ways of like getting through cold patches. Talk to your neighbors for a second. What's going on here for these animals that are in Idaho in the summertime?
That's not stuck.
Has anybody seen a hummingbird like this before? It's really uncommon. So that hummingbird was asleep and then it just like slipped, but its feet are locked, so it's all right. It's gonna wake up and be like, oh, and be like upside down. So tons of little vertebrates, especially endothermic vertebrates, have this ability to go into torpor. Torpor is something you can go into and come out of. Torpor is a reduction in your metabolic rate. You're slowing down all your body's systems. That means the energy demands of your body are less. And so this is a graph of 3 consecutive nights for like a little mouse. Each night after it gets dark, the mouse goes out and forages, but once it gets some food, it goes back to its burrow and it slows down its metabolism. And all night, it's not burning very much energy. Because if it was trying to keep itself hot while it's just sleeping, still it's getting colder throughout the seasons, that's going to cost a lot of energy. So instead of spending that energy to stay warm while you're sleeping, they just like slow their whole metabolism down, they slow their function down. That of course means they're vulnerable, right? They can't be active, they can't run away. So a lot of these animals live in things like burrows, they live in things like tree cavities, they find places to hide. And so torpor is this adaptive thing of just slowing down your body's metabolism. Bats go into a kind of torpor in the winter. A lot of bats we have in Idaho migrate, a lot of them don't. They stay in like nooks and crannies, all nestled together, all these little mammals, all slowing down their metabolism, but all also insulating each other with all their fur. Individual hummingbirds, as they go through migration, especially when they're passing through cold areas, if they're at like the cusp, right? A hummingbird that's like getting close to us now just got snow last night down in Utah, so it's probably like, oof. And so these hummingbirds can do this. They're famous for being like the most ridiculous metabolism. You guys probably have heard it before, right? Hummingbirds are just constantly like shooting sugar into their bodies, and they're always, this is a little bit incorrect, but it is like not generally wrong, hours from death if they don't get more sugar water, because they burn through their food supply, they burn through their energy so fast because they're flying so high energy demand. And so hummingbirds do torpor when nights get cold during migration. And even when they're in some parts of their range that are like mountainous at night, they'll just like shut it down. So I don't know how you can't love this. This is like some field research in Costa Rica. And if you actually Google this, you'll find the video and the hummingbird's going like every time it like takes a breath, which is pretty great. And they're holding it and it doesn't know because it's torporized. It's like, it's out. It's not sleeping. It's like torpor sleeping. So it's like not about to wake up, but that's a little vulnerable thing, right? Well, any of these other animals do some version of staying. So the moose, the chickadee, you can think of this as like mammalian or avian endothermy. They are high energy, they keep themselves insulated. Behaviorally, they're always looking for food, they're always foraging. There's not a lot of mating happening in the winter. There's not a lot of nest building happening in the winter. Everything is about food and getting food. So chickadees, yeah, do move regionally, but we still will see them all winter long. You guys are gonna be able to see a moose in the parks above Pocatello any month of the year. The mooses just stay. They have body size on their side, but both these animals are insulated, right? If we talk about the other vertebrates, the reptiles, the fishes, the amphibians that are definitely in Idaho, you guys probably know, just as like a general feature of biogeography, but like the farther north you go, the more it is just endothermic animals, birds and mammals. Go up to the Arctic, and it's a bunch of birds and a bunch of mammals. There's not a bunch of lizards and snakes and frogs and salamanders in the Arctic. Those animals just don't live there. But some of them live here. We're in a temperate area. And so a lot of these organisms do something called dormancy. It's a little different from torpor, but it is about the same idea where they just kind of slow their metabolisms down, but they won't do it like every night they slow it down. They'll do it for like months at a time. It's not hibernation. I'll talk to you about what hibernation is in a second, because these animals have in the summertime when the sun is out and they can sit on a hot rock, the ability to be absolutely active because the environment is giving them their heat, their ectotherms and their poikilothermic ectotherms. And so in the winter when it's cold, they don't go into torpor and then come out of torpor. They just let themselves get cold and just stay there, usually in a burrow, usually in a den. Has anybody here seen rattlesnakes emerging from a den? Is that a hand raise?
I think there's two.
Well, Andy, I feel like you have. Did you do that with Chuck? Because there's a couple places around here where like all the rattlesnakes and part of the Snake River Plain will like go into the same holes and just be in a big pile together. So these awesome videos in the spring where it's just like dozens of rattlesnakes are pouring out of the same hole because they're all waking up and then they're going to go spread out into the sagebrush. Really cool, right? So these animals are social sometimes over winter only because that's a one way to like safely, you're not alone and some bear's going to knock you open and eat you while you're frozen or almost frozen. And then of course, in some animals, like you guys might remember this in reproduction, animals like garter snakes, they all emerge at the same time and immediately it's like a orgy basically, because they're all together right then before they spread out for the year. So there's these really interesting ways these animals live in Idaho winter. They just let their bodies go cold. And yeah, Frania, there's like, there's this one, this one, lots of camo rattlesnakes. Same thing is true for fishes. Fishes are also just like ectothermic and poikilothermic. The water's really cold. There's no heat there. They let their body temperature drop. And as their body temperature drops, chemical reactions, enzymatic reactions are just going to slow down. So fishes under the ice are fine, but they're generally pretty lethargic. Of course, there's not as much food to eat, but that's okay because there's not as much energy that they need. Anybody here ice fish? Yeah, any ice fish stories you want to share?
All the guys.
How is that for an endothermic mammal?
It's very cool.
10 out of 10 don't recommend. Okay, that's good. Is it always trout that you're getting after? Yeah. So I'm from Michigan. People go ice fishing. It's always for like muskies and pike and things like that. But there's also trout. So that guy looks stoked. It's also pretty easy. Like I think ice fishing's funny because it's like seems like it's easy, but it's also like you have to get them to bite, and they might not care about food because they're all just cold. So they're sitting there.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say, so I fish not just like ice fish, but I fish a lot in the winter time.
Uh-huh.
You can actually feel the difference between the fish biting in the summer and winter, just that chill out. They really lethargic.
There's no rod.
Yeah, it's like really get a log sometimes. I mean, it depends on the fish,
Yeah.
but you can actually tell a pretty immediate difference. So kind of cool.
And so these fishes, right? They don't have anywhere to go. This is not a system that is like, has a lot of north-south spread. So fishes in the Mississippi River, which is a very different river than the Snake River, they can, and they do go from like living in Montana in the summer to being like, nope, and going down to like Missouri, Arkansas in the winter. They can move into warmer river waters. Our fishes here can't really. We don't have crocs in Idaho, which is always a bummer. We used to, but not anymore. So something I like to show you guys is how crocodiles deal with this. So alligators are some of the only crocodilians that like let themselves live in places that can freeze. And so places in the Carolinas and Oklahoma, not often, but sometimes will have nights like last night where there's just a really low temperature. These are very big animals. They are ectothermic. They are poikilothermic. So this does make them slow down their metabolisms, but these are also water animals. They're not going to spend that time out in the air where it could be like 20 degrees, 18 degrees, 15 degrees. It could be really cold in the air. No matter what, that pond might get freezing, but it's not going to get like more than like whatever, 31, 30 degrees. The water is always going to be warmer. So they stay in the water, but they're not fish. They're tetrapods. They breathe with their lungs. And so something that's really fun and happens almost every year is when a place like Arkansas or Oklahoma has a freeze, people go out because all the gators that night just go like this ahead of time. And they just let the ice freeze all around. And so you'll always see people freak out and they bring axes and shovels and they try to save the gators. And it's like, the gators are fine. They're just down there. They're looking up at you. You can't move. They let themselves be frozen in the ice. Most crocodilians absolutely do not live in a place where freezing ever happens. And that's not an accident. But these gators are like kind of the limit of crocodilian biology. And so when it freezes for just a little bit, this is what they do. Plus, I think, how is that not fun? This is very hilarious. It's like probably scary, but like, what's it gonna do? It's not gonna bite you. One really extreme version of dormancy is something that painted turtles and some small frogs do. And some of these animals are the like northernmost living like little ectothermic vertebrates. So up in Canada and up in Canada for both the frogs and the turtles, there's a video here that's linked. I'm not going to play it for you today because I want to talk about some more stuff today, but I encourage you to like look at the slides and click on this. It's a video of David Attenborough, so the British naturalist guy, talking about this. Both this frog and this turtle species up in Canada fully let themselves basically turn off. They don't go dormant and slow down their metabolism. They stop. They effectively die. They let their blood, their organs, everything truly freeze. They let themselves become the ice. We do not understand exactly how frogs then turn themselves back on or turtles turn themselves back on. It's probably enzymatic, it's probably anaerobic, but the understanding of how these animals let themselves fully stop, like no heartbeat, no brain activity, almost at all, and then come back in the spring is something that scientists want to know about because like obviously humans are like, I want to know how to do that. I want to know how to do that. So I would encourage you to watch this video. This is a frog that somebody dug out of the ground and it's just like a little ice cube. It's fully solid. So these animals have chemicals in their blood that makes it so like blood vessels don't burst. So the ice crystals don't like pop through all their organ systems, but they still let themselves totally freeze. The turtles especially, I really encourage you to like seriously watch this video because it's just so much little baby turtles and they just go like this and then like ice, it's a time lapse, but ice just goes over their whole bodies and then they're just there for 5 months. Off, they turn off. That's insane. The other, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, where in Idaho do you see painted turtles?
Way in the western part of the state, there was some. Do you know the answer to that actually from Perks? Because they're not here in our part of the state.
No, they're mostly in further north from us.
Oh, right, Coeur d'Alene, all that, on the river, Columbia River Basin. But they're not over in Boise area?
I don't know. I haven't seen them there.
Well, there's a ton of turtles over there now that are introduced turtles.
Yeah, they're introduced. I don't think they're native.
This is our native species up from the panhandle. There's red-eared sliders, which are a lot like this, all over the place once you get past Twin, and those are introduced from.
There's a lot of
Eastern
native
US.
reptiles there.
And there's snapping turtles over there too, right? That are introduced, yeah. Turtles are a mess, you guys. In terms of how humans have let them loose in a bunch of places they shouldn't have. Yeah, so we don't have that. We don't have a turtle around here. It's actually something that like I've lived here now for enough years that I'm used to it, but it just kind of bothers me when I go to a wetland and I'm like, look at this log, it's perfect. Nobody's using it. And it's like, well, Idaho's too cold. And then the waterfall cuts off animals coming up the snake too far. That's a big biogeographic barrier. So far, I hope you've noticed, we talked about animals who left. Some animals just like, not for me, and they leave, right? Snowbirds, they're gone. But most of these animals figure out ways to stay, and they have their different physiologies, their different requirements to stay. And some of those are really extreme, all the way to letting themselves freeze. One way that mammals stay, and this is a thing that has to do a lot with body size. These mammals have insulation. They have an ability to keep themselves quite warm with their metabolism, but that's a pretty high cost energetically. You have to eat a lot of food. A lot of mammals don't go dormant, where they just get cold for 5 months. They do this thing we call hibernation. You guys have heard of hibernation. Here's what hibernation looks like over a number of days for a marmot. So marmots live all over Pocatello, like look around, they're starting to pop out now. So here's 16 days of the marmot's life. Its body temperature is usually up here like yours is in the high 90s Fahrenheit, mid 30s Celsius. And then it goes into hibernation, body temperature falls, not to freezing, but it gets really down there. And then after about 2 weeks, it comes out of hibernation. That's called arousal. Hibernation can last the whole winter. Pikas do it, so that's a kind of lagomorph, a bunny relative. You guys probably, of course, know that bears do it, and bears are some of the biggest hibernating animals. All of these animals do the same things, but the bear is the most famous for like getting fat, right? Building up the energy reserves to spend the whole winter with that metabolism curled up in a burrow. So bears get fat, marmots get fat, pikas get kind of fat, but one thing pikas do is they just gather a lot of flowers and plants. You guys ever been hiking and seen pikas running around? Go hiking this summer, because all they do is spend the whole winter freaking out, grabbing flowers, and they make a hay pile that's like many times their body size that they sleep on, and then all winter they eat their way through the hay pile. So if you guys go to the Tetons, do me a favor, go to the Tetons this summer and go enjoy some pikas. So these are all different animals that go into a hole and hibernate. These ones bring body fat with them. This one stacks a bunch of food like a larder in its little hole. But hibernation is a pretty specific thing. Oh, there's a pika hay pile. Anyway. And you guys know bears. Bears go in there and usually have their babies, and so do marmots. Pikas, I don't think, do that. But marmots and bears, when they're in their burrows, the females usually have the baby. Baby gets born at like the absolute worst time of year, but safe in a burrow. And then that mother's fat reserves aren't only running her metabolism, but she's feeding milk to these babies. Polar bear is the most extreme example. They deserve all the props because she usually has twins, and they both drink like truly gallons and gallons of milk. And she's just making that in a hole for months, which is really, really crazy. The point I want to make, though, is that all these animals are truly hibernating, no matter what the energy they bring with them is. And this is what hibernation is. This is why it's different than torpor and different than dormancy. Here's the Arctic ground squirrel. The Arctic ground squirrel is an Alaskan and Canadian ground squirrel, like we have here in Idaho. We have other ground squirrels down here in Idaho. Arctic ground squirrel is one of the most extreme hibernators of any mammal. And here's what hibernation actually is. May, June, July, August, September, squirrel, live in a squirrel life. High body temperature, all about the same. This is what hibernation is. This period is also called heterothermy, so different temperatures. The squirrel's body temperature drops, and then it arouses itself. And then it drops, and then it arouses itself. Mammals have a physiology such that they cannot do what a snake does and just turn off for 5 months. Mammals have got to do a reset. We've got to come back online. And so the body fat that a bear has, a squirrel has, a marmot has, a pika has, and it's eating its way through its haystack, is the energy the mammal needs to come back to like awareness, come back to arousal, and then they go in again. So hibernation is the special word that we use for when there's like torpor, again, torpor, again, torpor, again, torpor, again, throughout the winter. A hummingbird does this overnight for 10 hours. A squirrel does this for 2 weeks, wakes up, does it for another 2 weeks, wakes up, does it for another 2 weeks, wakes up. Does that make sense? So that is what hibernation technically is. So a snake underground isn't hibernating, a fish under the ice isn't hibernating, a mammal's hibernating, and it's coming back up to almost its usual body temperature every time. And that's where they're burning through their fat reserves. When they're down low and their body temperature can get below freezing, which is really crazy. They're not freezing themselves because the chemistry of their blood, the chemistry of their organs is such that it's not pure water, so they're not freezing. But the temperature is below freezing. They need all that fat because they need to burn up out of that low state. So you can imagine a bear doing that. It's really, really, really intense. And so Arctic ground squirrels are a pretty incredible animal. Definitely encourage people to look those up if you're interested. Cool. Questions about this kind of stuff? I focused on Idaho because we live in a cool place that has intense seasonality. If you guys were all college students in Brazil, we'd be like, it's a little bit wet, a little bit dry, otherwise pretty hot. None of the animals really do a lot of stuff like this. Idaho is very temperate and seasonal, so stuff happens that's really, really intense. I also want to talk about just other places in the world and other adaptations animals have. There's a word you might hear, and it's called aestivation. I think we're going to hear about it. I think James is going to talk about it later on, so I won't go too far. Aestivation is something that happens in the tropics, and it's something that happens to a lot of non-endothermic animals. So I guess I should say ectothermic or poikilothermic animals. And it's not really about temperature. Places like in Africa and South America and Australia might stay pretty warm the year round, but the water all goes away. You go through the dry season. And so if you're an elephant or a wildebeest, whatever, you walk the other way. Some of these animals, fishes, amphibians, they can't really deal with that. So they do something where it's kind of like dormancy. They let their body metabolism go down, but of course their temperature isn't going down. So they have to intentionally turn off chemical processes inside their body. And what a lot of these animals do is envelop themselves in like an envelope of slime. They like let themselves get covered in like this cocoon. They secrete it a couple times. It kind of dries out and seals them. So all they care about is keeping water in their bodies. Because if they were just to sleep in the mud, that mud's going to dry out even many feet down. So they make themselves little wet cocoons. So here's a nice lungfish, a sarcopterygian, just like you, at the bottom of a stream. Here's a lungfish during the dry season. It's been completely exposed. The river's totally dry, but it's in this like kind of gross looking mucus cocoon that keeps all of its water in. And its physiology is down, 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 down. This frog's also in a little cocoon that it's secreted. And so some mean scientist dug it out of the ground and it has it on an envelope to like look at. But that frog is all sealed up. It's not awake. This is a weird fish from Australia, salamander fish. You guys might remember that. It's one of these ones that like disappears into the sand and like the whole water's gone. There's no water there anymore. And then in the spring when it rains, this fish will just like come out of the sand. And it's been in there. And so people are honestly studying this fish to understand how it aestivates. So aestivation is more about keeping water in your body because temperature isn't the problem. You're slowing your metabolism down so you don't use all your body fat and use all your water while you're waiting the dry season out. Incredibly, there's at least one kind of lemur in Madagascar, one of the desert parts of Madagascar, that also does a kind of aestivation, which is like hibernation. So hibernation means you have to wake up a bunch of times. These animals are not doing that. The bamboo lemur kind of is. I hope you can see by this name, that's like a little in your face. Fat-tailed bamboo lemur. You guys know what it eats and you know something about it. So the fat-tailed bamboo lemur builds up a huge fat reserve in its tail. It has a big fat tail, kind of like what some lizards do. And then it goes deep into a tree hollow and mostly sleeps and its body eats through the fat. And it keeps all the water in its tail and this tissue too. This is very wet fat inside its tail. So this is a mammal that's like kind of flirting with this little bit of ecology, again, to get through the dry season. I think that's really cool. Any questions about this kind of stuff? Okay, good. I have something for you. A lot of research, a lot of scientists, a lot of people that do not care about like animals because animals are fun, care about this stuff. So talk to your neighbor for a second. Why should we and why do we care so much about how animals make it through these very different seasonal climate issues they have? Talk to each other about that, please.
Big house here.
All right, why do we care? What are some things we might care about? Yeah, guys.
It could help with, both like food refrigeration and also this organ transplant refrigeration.
Organ transplant, you can bring your organ across, right? Food refrigeration is really interesting, like the meat, like won't go bad kind of thing. That's amazing. I hadn't thought about that at all. All right, what other things?
I was thinking space travel, like if you're trying to get to a star that's 1,000 years away, you can just turn like humans to dolphins.
every time like people make like a warp drive or like a black hole or anything like that, we're all like, I get it, I love it, but of course that's fantasy at this point. It doesn't exist for humanity yet. We don't know how to do that. Another big thing we do is we pretend that we're gonna do this someday, and we really want to be able to do this someday. The closest star to us, and it I think has like 2 gas giants on it, which by the way is amazing, we know that, is still 4 light years away. So it's gonna take you like decades and decades to fly there if you're going really fast. And so you can do a bunch of nightmare options where you do like have a giant spaceship that's just full of sperm and eggs and a bunch of robots create people when they get there. That's interesting. Interesting. You can have it be a giant colony ship that's like got agriculture and it's a big spinning wheel and like generations live and die on that ship. That's one thing you could do. Another thing you could do is freeze people in some kind of way, right? This is the thing you guys always see in sci-fi, right? How do we do that? And you don't have to go to other stars. It still takes you like 6 months to get to Mars. So if you're a guy or a gal who goes to Mars 5 times once we start building colonies there, maybe it's going to cost you like 15 years of your life at the end of it just to go back and forth. Who's going to sign that? Who wants to do that? What if I freeze you and it's not so much time for you? Interesting. So I think this is a really interesting graph. So the duration of slowing down a human metabolism, not slowing it down for minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. And then the metabolic activity, stopping it completely, reducing it, just resting, normal. So take a minute, look at this graph, see what it's trying to tell you and what the issues are. Try to interpret it. How long and how much of a metabolic shutdown we can put in a human. By the way, this is like well-funded, right? NASA and a lot of other people want to figure out how to do this. So go ahead, look at that for a minute. All right, what's some things you guys can take away from this? What have we been talking about, I guess? There's a lot.
The Mars mission.
Yeah.
To what like naturally hibernating animals would do.
How do we get people to be like black bears and marmots? That'll get us some of the way there. I love this because this is always the real thing, right? Cryonics, like we can absolutely flash. Oh my gosh, we can absolutely flash freeze you, but you're gonna be dead. So that's not good. But that's really interesting, right? I do think the robots with the eggs and sperm, that'd be a big old mistake because those people can get raised by robots. I don't know. So it's like, it's frustrating, right? A moderate reduction. You guys know hibernation is cool. Hibernation's for a few weeks, but you got to wake up. A few weeks, you got to wake up. So it's going to like eat at the margins, but that's not, you know, what else are people talking about?
Weston was saying like black bears, you know, they eat a lot of food, like they get pretty chunky. And they're like, well, we have to do something similar.
Oh, yeah, we'll hook you up with some IVs. You don't have to get that. How about this? We can do some of this. We can take a human and put their physiology down and do it for days, but it's therapeutic hypothermia. It's like making you so cold. That's gonna it's gonna suck. You just get, I'm sure it'll put you to sleep somehow with a chemical, but like still, well, but that's really unpleasant to wake up from. So anyway, we're gonna do this someday. Eventually this is gonna happen, unless we nuke ourselves or something, but you know, I think probably we're gonna get there. And what's really funny is you can imagine developments in this for the next couple centuries, and then eventually someone's gonna be like, oh, yo, check it out, and they can invent space time, and then we just go, it'll be fine. But we'll see, who knows? I just like you guys to like learn about squirrels for a minute and then be like, but you know what, it's actually a little cooler than just squirrels, if you really think about it. All right. Kind of switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about some physiological extremes. There's a big animal that has a ton of physiological extremes. And some of the anatomy that goes into it. And instead of going all over the place and talking about tons of different subjects, we're going to focus in on just a couple places. So I wanted to ask you guys this question. I think it's kind of a fun question for you to think about. You are a temperate mammal. I mean, we're tropical mammals too, but you guys personally are like temperate mammals. You know what's cold, you know what's hot, you know what's dry, you know what's wet. You live on this planet. This planet's incredible for life, but it's also important to keep in mind it's incredible for life because like we evolved here, so we're like adapted to it. That's why it's so incredible. Some life maybe in other parts of the universe wouldn't like Earth, but we do. There's a lot going on here that's good for our physiology, good for our anatomy, good for our temperature preferences, good for our metabolic activities. It's a great place to live. But where on the planet is it inhospitable? Where is it challenging? Doesn't mean nobody's doing it. It's just kind of harder than everywhere else. There's a whole bunch of them, but go ahead and talk to each other about that.
So pretty much it's fine. The very thing. I sort of, oh, I would. Yeah, there's like super tall and all like that.
So another thing, keep talking, but another thing to think about is some places are, there's always variability all across the planet. Some animals just like regulate themselves differently, like you shiver, you put on a coat when it's cold, but then eventually the exchanges are so extreme, the actual like processes inside your body start to change. Not you guys, not humans, but other animals, like they adapt really specifically. So this is like another way to ask you the same question, but just another thing to talk about. Okay, keep going.
I guess here's the environment. Lots of
Yeah.
Yeah. Extreme. Pretty.
All right, so where are some places that are inhospitable? Where is it a challenge? What makes it challenging?
About places without light.
Places without light. So what kind of places are those? Bottom of the ocean? What else? Caves. Caves can be really intense. Bottom of the ocean, so place without light. Interesting. We'll hold on to that. What else?
I was gonna add the rainforest.
Oh, rainforest floor, yeah. Oh, sure. Or just like the underground, like subterranean. There's plenty of like animals that are right outside that are like not sunlight friendly, but they're not very far away, right there. Down a foot. Plant a flower, you'll find one. Okay, what else?
Salinity.
Salinity, so saltiness. And so what are you talking about? What are these habitats?
Like the Dead Sea or like Salt Lake, for example, really high salt, a lot of things can't live there, but some things can't.
Yeah, imagine being a duck and you've never been to Utah and you're like, oh, good. And you land and you're like, oh, no. So like there's different levels of salinity and that can be really extreme, right? Because salt can be extracted. You guys know about osmosis. If you're a fish and you suddenly go into really salty water or really unsalty water, anything changes with the osmotic flow of the salt, you're going to have a problem. You guys buy fish at the store and put it in a salt tank and it's not a salt fish, it dies, right? So salinity challenges. So where are places that are really salty? AJ's talking about the Dead Sea, Salt Lake City, not Salt Lake City, but the Salt Lake is one. Endorheic basins are what those are called, by the way. Where else is really, really salty? Not salty, really salty. The ocean's pretty salty, but the ocean's kind of funny because it's like almost all the habitable space on the planet is the ocean. So it's kind of like, I treat that salt as the default. You think it's salty, but it's not salty. Any places in the ocean especially salty? The whole ocean stratigraphy is made up of temperature gradients and salinity gradients. So there are parts of the ocean that like, it's just blue water to you if you look, but some of it's way saltier than other parts. That's true. All right, what other kind of habitats are inhospitable or challenging? We got light, we got salinity. These are now like, you guys are talking about physical challenges, but what are the places? Deep ocean, caves, Salt Lake. What else? Deserts, what about deserts? Water, yeah, water retention, hot, get baked. It's true. All right, these are good examples. Let's jump into it a little bit. We could talk about deserts. Deserts are the one that always like, deserts always call to me. So do caves, because caves, like, doesn't matter what you are, if you evolved to live in a cave, usually the same weirdo things happen. A whole on box of cheeses. My God. I always get called to caves because caves are cool. Deserts also have a lot of convergence, a lot of adaptation that's similar, but I want to talk about the real Earth. Caves and deserts are land habitats, and the land is only 30% of the surface of the planet. This is a cross-section of the world's oceans. Most by volume of all the space that organisms could possibly be in on this planet is deep ocean. That's most of this planet. Most of this planet is that. The ocean is divided up into all these different zones. There's a lot of fish in the world, as you guys have learned over and over and over again. About half of the fish in the world are in fresh water, which is like a small percentage of the actual volume of water on the planet, lakes and streams and rivers. Another almost half are in the oceans. But when we say the oceans, we mean that first 200 meters where the sun makes a difference, where when you dive, it looks like something. Everything underneath that red line is like dark or totally black ocean. And that's most of the habitat on this planet that actually is available. There are 6% of fishes that live down in the deep. So it's not super diverse. I want you to take a second, think about the different like energetic, trophic, food, energy requirements. What is even happening down here? What can you predict about the ecology, the biology, the anatomy maybe of animals that are living down at the deep? Actually, talk to each other about that for a second.
Yeah.
All right, what are going to be some challenges for these animals, or some expectations you have for organisms that are living down there, or just at all, what's that habitat going to be like? Scary to you. True. Scary. I think, let's be real here. I think this is scary. I don't know if you guys have ever been out, like, who's ever been out like in the ocean, like where you like can't see the land anymore, or you almost can't see the land. The pretty shiny sunny part is almost 600 feet deep. And you guys like swimming in 600 feet of water, and you're like, right? When you're a kid and you're like in the 8-foot section, like, right? This is 600 feet of water that's all pretty and sunny. And that's like the nice part. We're not even talking about that. So it is gonna be pretty alien to you. So what's it like down there besides scary? A lot of water pressure. Every 33 feet you go down, AKA every 10 meters you go down, you get the equivalent of another atmosphere of pressure added onto you. So think about the air in your lungs, when you pop your ears on an airplane, the pressure as you go deeper and deeper gets insane. You get to like hundreds and hundreds of atmospheres of pressure, thousands of pounds per square inch pushing on the sides of your body. And the reason, like when scientists go down in their cool submarines, like if the glass breaks, they all die immediately. They don't like drown. They're good. Yeah, it doesn't go well. Okay, what else besides pressure? Not you can't really see. There's no light. I mean, you're right. There's a fun in between the twilight zone, where it's like a little bit bright, kind of in the middle of the day, but otherwise pretty dark. Once you get down here, straight up dark. This habitat, think about the bathypelagic zone called the midnight zone. The abyss is way scarier, right? But like the midnight zone. The midnight zone is a habitat that is always the same temperature. It's always the same amount of light, and it's been that way for millions and millions and millions of years. Maybe the temperature goes up a few degrees and down a few degrees during ice ages, but you never would notice it in your lifetime. So this is you want to talk about evolutionary pressures, habitats, like, oh, got to adapt. This place is a constant, and most of the volume of habitable space on this planet is the midnight zone. Freaky, right? All right, let's see some cool fishes that live there. You guys know a ton of fishes from the sunlight zone. Who cares? You've seen them before. Here's some mesopelagic fishes. You've met some of them when we did our fish diversity. So these are the fishes that live in the twilight zone. Lantern fishes, which are maybe the most abundant organisms on the planet. There's probably billions and billions. Well, no, there are billions. There might be trillions of them in the oceans right now. Things like hatchet fish, snipe eels. A lot of these animals have upward facing eyeballs because there's sometimes light. And they have chromophores. They have on the bottom of their body patches of skin that match the color of the light above them. So you can't see them from below, but they can see their prey, which is above them. They're trying to find those silhouettes. So these animals flirt with light. And in this area, every single day, all the time, there's these gigantic vertical migrations, fishes that hide in the dark during the daytime, and then at night they come up to eat because that's where all the food is, it's where all the sun is, it's where all the primary production is happening. Then they go back down as the sun comes back up and they go down to the dark again. So the twilight zone is a really, really, really important part of Earth's biology that humans are only kind of starting to get a really good handle on because the oceans are not our home. And it's down really deep, right? So there's some fishes that live in the twilight zone. Cool. Here's some bathypelagic fishes in the big midnight. This is where you're going to watch a TV show and like they're showing you all the crazy stuff. So you guys have seen these before, right? And if you go back to the fish slides, you know these fishes are all very different in terms of where they are in the phylogeny. These aren't all like a little clade of scary fish. Anglerfish are related to things like pufferfish and angelfish. And then there's an eel with eyeballs right there. This one is a joke, right? I mean, eyeballs up here and this humongous mouth. Gulper eels, of course, can swallow prey that's much bigger than them, and they don't actually put it in their stomachs. They just like hold it and like slowly swallow it in their big old mouths. So lots of predation, lots of scary stuff. I hope you're noticing things about color. What happens to color? What happens to pigmentation when there's no light anywhere? Then there's the abyssal zone, aka the abyss. So like the bottom of the deep ocean. So who's hanging out way down low? We got the ratfish, chimeras are down here, hagfishes are down here. Hagfish is just sitting there waiting for a big whale to fall. This whale's living its whole life. Eventually it dies, its body sinks, smashes right there. Hagfish are waiting, they're ready. They're gonna eat all the meat off those bones. So a lot of these cool fishes down here, the sharks that are adapted to be down here. The grenadier is a big kind of cod. I hope you guys remember the tripod fish that always waits on the bottom, on its pelvic fins and its caudal fin. So that's the abyss. All kinds of fishes that are kind of adapted to be on the bottom, but they're living at these really, really, really insane pressures. Really cool, right? So that's like tons of the Earth. If you look at the Earth from space, this dark blue, like that's this. You know, most of the ocean's floor is that abyssal zone. Cool. So we already asked you this, I did this out of order. Environmental characteristics of the deep sea, really low input of nutrients. There's no primary productivity happening that's driven by the sun. So there's probably not a lot of like low on the food chain stuff. Everybody's living in a pretty cold world, a pretty constant world, a pretty dark world. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Extremely high pressures. I already asked you this too. How is the deep sea different from other habitats? And what might we expect to see down there? Actually, I'll let you guys talk about that. You just saw some of the fishes. What are the adaptations you're going to expect these animals to all have and share, regardless of their phylogenetic position? They're all living down there, so what are they going to share?
Yeah.
Leave it tonight.
All right, what's some anatomy you guys either just saw or would expect to see once we see more of these things?
I expect to see like an ability to, kind of like crocodiles, just eat one meal and then persist on that for a long time.
So somehow like dietary adaptations to eat rarely, because there's not a lot down here. What other challenges come along with that? Besides just eating? Finding what? Finding food. Think about it, you guys probably already know, how do some of these animals find food?
Wait for food to find that.
Got a light flashlight on my forehead and I'm like, right? What other challenges are like that? Where it's like just low density down there? Finding mates. I'm not gonna talk about it, but does anybody know about anglerfish? What they do? There's only a couple species that actually do this, but they're very pop culture famous. So anglerfish, which are, I'll just talk about this because it's too much fun. These ones, the big ones are female, and they do the thing that anglerfish do. The males are really tiny, and most males are gonna live their life and they're just never gonna see a female. It won't work. They're too rare. They're all spread out and they're tiny. She's like this, they're like this. The males, the adult male is like this. So some of these species, when he finds a female, he goes right up and he bites onto her, like with his teeth, like fully embeds his teeth into her. He fuses his circulatory system with her circulatory system. He becomes a little parasite on her. Eventually his whole body just kind of withers down to nothing except for his testicles. And then she just takes the sperm from them whenever she wants to make eggs. So for him, it's like, I found one. Over. He's a parasite. He lives off her blood. She feeds him and then uses the sperm. Isn't that ridiculous? That's anglerfish. Not a lot of them are doing this, but anglerfish are doing that. So that's a really good example. So it's hard to find food. It's hard to find mates. It's dark. You cannot see everybody. And like everybody's really rare because it's a pretty low density ecosystem. That's crazy, right? So when we talk about deep sea fishes, what other adaptations might we expect?
Everything seemed to pretty much just be a big mountain.
Big mouths and herbivores?
No.
No plants, right? No sunlight. Okay. We'll talk about things like pressure and some other stuff you guys didn't say, but here's what you usually think of, right? When you think of deep sea fishes. Have anybody seen this before? Do you know what this is? It's usually a meme. What is this? The blobfish. This is the saddest thing ever. Anybody want to say anything about this picture? Why is this particularly sad? Yes, it's dead, but why else is this particularly sad? He exploded. Everyone's like, LOL, blobfish, ugly. That's not fair. This is what a blobfish looks like. If you actually get in a submarine and you go down really far, they just look like a nice little fish. When you catch them and you bring them to the surface and the pressure is released, all their body just pops. So they don't really look like this. They look like this. I think that's a nice little fish with its eggs. All right, so deep sea fishes, my point there, are always dealing with pressure. So here's some examples of some fishes. You guys know your fishes, right? Actinopterygian, 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 Chondrichthyid, Elasmobranch Chondrichthyid, and actually Teleos, 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 Teleos. So these are different fishes that you guys know things about. You have expectations about what their anatomy already is based on what kind of fish they are. So talk to each other for a second. How are they all doing this in the deep, deep, deep sea? All right, so you just based on what you know about fish anatomy and fish biology, how do you guys think these animals are accomplishing moving neutral buoyancy at high, ridiculous high pressure.
There needs to be some kind of a gas exchange system in place.
Some kind of gas station system. What are all of these? Let's just say the ag refuges. What do they all have? Not all of them. What do a bunch of the teleos have up in the surface waters? Swim bladder. They got the thing that's homologous with your lung. They can take oxygen from their blood, put it into the lung. They can gulp air and put it into the lung. They can fill the lung with air. What's the problem? You might be in hundreds of atmospheres of pressure. How are you going to fill a balloon in your body when going like this as hard as you can is going to do nothing because the pressure, it's really hard to imagine because you guys are land animals. The pressure is so intense. How are you going to fill it? Well, so something like the lanternfish absolutely does use a swim bladder, just like a normal fish does. But this lanternfish is in that twilight zone. So it's really working hard to do a swim bladder. And every day it's migrating up and down. It's going up into the shallows where it's easier, going down into the dark where it's a little harder, but it's still basically using that teleost swim bladder. So that lanternfish is not that crazy, but it's also not that deep. So it's kind of like the other fishes. The gulper eel doesn't do it. Too deep. They just don't even have the swim bladder. They don't use it. The swim bladder is for giving you some neutral buoyancy. Neutral buoyancy is part of being able to move efficiently and fast. These fishes aren't necessarily chasing things. They aren't necessarily hunting. They don't necessarily have to have efficient locomotion because they're living this chilled out, drift with the current kind of life. The gulper eel is an example of a fish that basically just like let go of even trying to really care about its buoyancy with that internal system. It also has like extremely reduced skeleton, which is lightening it up relative to other eels of the same body size. So it's not sinking as easily because it has a skeleton that's really reduced. So this is a weirdo way of being like a almost planktonic floating fish that's not going for buoyancy so much anymore. Interesting, interesting, interesting. How is the shark going to do buoyancy? Anybody remember? And it was like a deep pull. You all cut them open, so I figure you remember. Yes, yes, let's hear. Somebody hasn't said anything yet. Well, remember how do sharks do it? They don't have swim bladders. Only Osteichthyans have swim bladders. Or sorry, have a foregut diverticulum. Only some teleos have swim bladders. So how are these chondrichthyans? How are these sharks doing it?
Just a larger fatty liver.
Their liver is humongous and they stuff it full of fat and oil like float in water, right? So that shark, I bet you can guess, just has an even more ridiculous and even more huge and even more lipid full liver. So it just does the shark thing, but turns it up to 11. Not that crazy. One thing that's really cool is this grenadier, which is a cod relative and lives in the abyssal zone at the very bottom, is absolutely a teleost. Not only is it like forget the swim bladder, oh well, sorry, it has the swim bladder, but it doesn't fill the swim bladder with air. It fills the swim bladder with lipids. It's turned its swim bladder basically into the shark liver. Instead of having an air pocket in the middle of its body, it just dumps fat into that, and that fat is kind of floaty. So this is a fish that's like, good plan, and has adapted through its own evolution. Other animals that are related to it, not very far away, that live in the normal surface waters, just have a normal swim bladder. But this is one that pumps its swim bladder full of fat. It's not like fat like your fat, right? It's like loose lipids. Go ahead.
So are there any fish that deep that actually do have like a air-filled swim bladder? Because humans, when we scuba dive, our lungs, they maintain the same amount of air as long as you have an air input.
Yeah.
They can breathe underwater. I'm sure that's somewhere. But humans, our lungs just go from however big they are here to just
Compressed.
tiny,
Yeah.
and it holds all the same air.
Right. Right? You could do that, right? You could pump a basketball and there's a ton of air and a lot of pressure and it will work. So yeah, there are animals that do that, but like usually the answer is no. There's not like pressurized swim bladders. There are pressurized parts of your anatomy, and then when you release the pressure, you explode. But no, not for a swim bladder. So this is really cool, right? All these animals also have special challenges that have to do with how they migrate, temperature adaptations, all things like that. Some of them don't ever leave the same zone, so they're in the same habitat all their life. Some of them are migrating and have to deal with things like temperature. I think I'm going to skip that for now. Cass, great segue. Thank you so much. These are the fishes, the fish vertebrates. You guys know those other vertebrates, right? Here are the 3 deepest diving tetrapods of all time that we have measured. I only say of all time because we have a measurement of it. There might be some extinct stuff that's really cool, but I can't tell you that. So here we go, a sperm whale, an elephant seal, a beaked whale. Talk to your neighbors, how deep they go. How deep does a sperm whale go when it's going down to do some cool stuff? All right, this is totally a guess, but you got to guess. Twilight Zone, so one layer down. It's better than that, but it's when I made this graph, because I'd never seen this graph, so I made this and I was like, that's really funny. Here's a sperm whale world record. That's deep, but also I just showed you all these fish that are just chilling. That's the farthest sperm. Almost a full-on like mile down, right? Like really deep, really deep. Here's the elephant seal world record. Here's the Cuvier's beaked whale world record. So they're all going into the midnight zone. The midnight zone is full of a lot of stuff. Unfortunately for you guys, you're in a comparative vertebrate anatomy class, so we can't talk about all the insane octopuses and squid that actually dominate that zone, but that's why they're going there. They don't care about any anglerfish. They're there for the squid, the cephalopods. Anyway, that's how deep they go. So put that in mind when you think about the fishies. And of course, you guys know, like Castor said, these are breathing air. They have a lot of things that make it really hard. So it's really incredible that they go down that far. All right, let's talk about them. So why is the sperm whale going down deep? You guys probably know this. Because it has one of the like objectively coolest ecologies on the planet. It's a gigantic whale with a gigantic head. It's the biggest toothed whale we have. It's like one of the biggest predators on the planet. That's like a macro predator, and it goes down in Heinz giant squid that are 40 feet long. It's the best. It's a great animal. Nobody else really does it like this. So this is a sperm whale. Here's the lower jaw tucked in. There's the eyeball. Here's a sad one that's beached. All over its face are all these scars from giant squid. So these are animals that that's their ecology, is to go down and find those squid. Those squid all have suckers that have like sharp edges, and of course, like their beak is very sharp. So these squids always put up a fight. There are a couple of videos, like humans are always getting better with our cameras and our like accessibility. So there are a couple of videos recently of like sperm whales that are like coming up from the deep, like with like the tentacles trailing, which like we don't see that because they're usually just swallowed by the time they come up. But it's great because it's just like tons of tentacles hanging out of their mouth. It's a great ecology, a great animal. So how does an air-breathing, endothermic, homeothermic whale do that? So here's a sperm whale. There's its lungs up at the surface. So sperm whale lungs are that big when it's like taking in the air. Here's a cross-section of the whale's body. So there's the vertebra, there's the ribs. This is the trachea that goes down, or the bronchia that go down into the lungs. And then there's the volume of the lungs themselves. Like Cass said, these lungs fill with air, and as the whale goes down, this is only 50 meters, this is only 100 meters, so not deep at all. Those lungs actually physically just get compressed. They become a scuba tank where it's pressurized air because the animal's diving so far. When human beings dive with scuba tanks and we bring our own pressurized air, we only go down 4 atmospheres, and then it becomes like you need tons of licenses and it's like medically unsound. This thing's going down like dozens and dozens of atmospheres. It's way higher pressure. Humans like barely, we cannot do it. So there's one thing that happens. These animals let their lungs get compressed. And then what's in those lungs in the first place that's important here? Oxygen, right? To power all these muscles, to do all these things. So there's also physiological adaptations. You guys have, and all mammals have, in your blood, hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, there's like a single protein here that can hold an oxygen molecule, and hemoglobin is a big group of 4 flowing around in your blood. Your red blood cells have hemoglobin to carry the oxygen around your body. There's other units, this is called myoglobin, that isn't going around your blood, it's like in your muscle tissues. And so all kinds of diving mammals, and that includes things like whales, have insane amounts of myoglobin. There's like white meat and dark meat in a chicken, while in the whale, there's like ridiculously dark red meat. The muscles in the whale's body are not only powerful, they're absolutely overloaded with myoglobin. So they can take, when they're up at the surface and a whale's going and breathes like a bunch of times, it's not just filling its lungs, it's pushing all that oxygen around in its bloodstream, and then that oxygen is being taken in by the muscles and not used, but like stored in the muscles, in these myoglobin chains. So that when the whale's actually down there, yes, it's got some oxygen in its lungs, but the muscles themselves are actually oxygenated. And so as the muscles are burning, as that whale's flapping its tail, fighting a squid, coming up to the surface, the muscles themselves have oxygen right there. There's still oxygen in the lungs that gets spread around in the blood to restock, but most of the oxygen is being stored down there in the muscles, which is really cool. You do not really do that. You have it all in your blood, moving it all around all the time. That's the sperm whale. Let's talk about the elephant seal that goes down. Just a couple of physiological things. We don't have as much time as I wish we did, so I'm going to try to think about what to emphasize here. This is showing you like an individual elephant seal's day, how many dives it makes, and for how deep they go. I'm sorry. So 40% of its dives are pretty shallow, but there's a couple dives it does every day that go really deep, and some of them can last for over an hour. Also, this is duration. Can last for a long time. Most dives are pretty short. Some can last for a really long time. One thing that you can take in here, this looks a lot like hibernation. I think it's really cool. Here's the actual depth profile. So going down to 450 meters for this seal, foraging probably on the bottom of the ocean. Dives down really deep, comes up to breathe, dives down really deep, comes up to breathe, dives down really deep, comes up to breathe. Every time it dives down, it lets its heart rate fall. So when it's down deep, it's not demanding its metabolism to like constantly be going. Its heart rate goes down when it's like looking for clams on the bottom. And then as it comes back up, its heart rate pops back up to 100% of normal. So every time the elephant seal's down there, its physiology is going down. One measure of that would be heart rate. This is an example of like an elephant seal's day. So here's midnight to midnight, and here's all the different depths it goes to. So obviously it's eating at around 450 meters. That's probably how deep the ocean is in that space where that animal lives. And so that's its life. You can see it makes these little adventures down into deeper water. The seals also have myoglobin. I think this is a really cool graph. This is showing, like, if you look at these two pie graphs, the oxygen that's available to your cells to use in any metabolic process for ATP to go through. In you, there's some in your muscles, some in your blood, but most of it's in your blood, some of it's in your lungs, a little bit of it is in your muscle. And you can compare that to the elephant seal, which has a huge amount of it in its blood and a lot in its muscle and very little in its lungs. It's a very different way of keeping the oxygen. You are not diving, so your lungs, just as like a passive balloon, is a pretty standard thing. This is a really similar graph comparing you, a human. Blue is lungs, red is blood, purple is myoglobin, so muscle tissue, and then blue is just like other parts of your body, other tissues. And so you can see how different seals and sea lions have adapted to oxygen storage. Not only can they store more than you, you can see how they're doing it. So Dr. Neighbor, real quick, what parts of the seal or sea lion anatomy are being used to store the more oxygen relative to the human? So I can hear you guys. I can hear you guys doing the interpreting, and you're nailing it, and it's pretty straightforward, right? It's different colors. What I think is so cool about this is like, it's not like there's a thing that all the seals do, right? These seals all have different ecologies and they do different things. Whale seals aren't particularly deep diving. It's a ton of oxygen in their blood, some in their myoglobin. They're Antarctic seals. They can hold a ton of it. Why does an Antarctic seal that doesn't dive that deep like store way more oxygen than everybody else at all? It's under the ice. What if your hole freezes over? What if you can't find your hole for a second? This seal isn't deep diving, but it does live under ice. This seal lives on the beach and doesn't care about anything. It has almost the same oxygen physiology as you do. That's not holding more oxygen. Whatever, I don't dive, I just eat fish on the surface. So not all these animals have, like the seal plan. I think it's just cool to see that even in this group of very closely related organisms, there's a lot of metabolic adaptation. We're gonna skip this for now. I think we'll skip that for now. This is the Cuvier's beach whale. This is the longest known dive of any tetrapod, any kind of thing at all. This is one individual that was measured. So here's dive duration, 33 to 37 minutes, an hour or so of diving. And you can see there's a long tail here. Most of the dives, this is a curve getting up to 100% of the observed dives, Once you get around here, there's not very many dives that are more than an hour and a half. But the longest observed Cuvier's beach whale dive is a shocking amount of time. Almost 4 hours is the longest single dive of any Cuvier's beach whale. And this actually, I think this graph is a bunch of different beach whales, but the Cuvier's beach whale is the one. These are very rare animals. They're very hard for scientists to find, but there's one that was down for at least almost 4 hours, which is a real nightmare to really imagine. We'll skip this, skip that. The last thing I want to say to you guys, because I want to hand out your exams, is the fact that like, even the deepest, scariest stuff we've talked about is at 6,000 meters. Not very big, but ocean trenches are almost another 6,000. It's another 5,000 meters of depth, right? The Hadal zone, Hadal is like hell, like Hades. On ocean trenches, places where continents come together and one piece of crust is going under another piece of crust. It's not a lot of space on the planet, but it's extremely deep. These are the two vertebrates that are known. These are the deepest known vertebrates in the world. There's a cusk eel. I'll let you appreciate whatever you want to appreciate about the cusk eel. And then the unnamed, it doesn't have a species name as far as I know, ethereal snailfish. Found at these depths. They don't move very much. There's already starfish and slugs and other stuff down there that's like, it's no big deal. But this is the deepest. These are the two deepest vertebrates. And then there's another 3,000 meters of ocean that, as far as we know, no vertebrates have ever been to. It's really cool. Think about, and you guys are earthlings, so you should be aware. Okay. I'll stop for now. We almost talked about this, but we're not going to. All right, I have your exams. So let me turn off Zoom.